Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are getting into part 2 of 5 major differences in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Now today we're going to cover the two towers. That's right, the middle piece, this part of it that binds it all together. We're going to get into that and we're going to get into it right now. Alright guys, here we go. Number 5 on the list for the two towers today is Haldir. Haldir in the film dies by an axe to the back of the head. We see in a very emotional moment where he's fighting off the orcs and he's in this zone, right? And he turns around and says, Haldir! And boom, axe gets him right in the back of the head. Well, the number 5 difference here, Haldir does not die in the book. Actually, when they leave Lothlorien in the Fellowship of the Ring, that's the last time we see the character. So I guess somebody had to be a sacrificial lamb, right? Alright, number 4, let's stick with the elves. Number 4, probably the most obvious difference that you've probably heard before is in the film, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli have come to help the people of Rohan at Helm's Deep, and they're waiting on Gandalf to show up. They say, look to my coming at first light on the 5th day. At dawn, look to the east. All that good stuff. Well, they've probably forgotten about it at this point. So, in the movie, it's a very cool moment, very emotional moment. The elves show up to help. The elves of Lothlorien show up to help at Helm's Deep. Now, in the book, this doesn't happen. The elves are like, you know what? You can fend for yourself. No elf actually joins that battle whatsoever. And the Battle of Helm's Deep is pretty much the scariest thing in the world in the book, because they're surrounded by all these people. So, yeah, number 4, the elves, they never showed up. All right, number 3. Number 3 is very interesting. And the reason why number 3 is interesting is because this one, you can literally see where the filmmakers are trying to make a plot point and make something a little more interesting than it could be in the book. Now, for example, in the Fellowship of the Ring, Merry and Pippin are taken away by the orcs, and they are being taken to Sauron and Isengard because they think that these hobbits have an elvish weapon. They think they have the ring, when in reality they don't have the ring. But as you know in the films, if you've seen the extended edition, Merry says to Pippin, the second they find out we don't have it, we're dead. So they escape because the orcs have brought them to the outer rim of Fangorn Forest. They go into Fangorn Forest trying to run away, and then of course Treebeard appears and takes them and thinks they're little orcs, all this kind of stuff. And then he says to them, the white wizard will know. And he drops them off at the feet of a white wizard. Now, if you've never read the books, if you've never seen the movie, then you think that this is Sauron and ends up being Gandalf when Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli tracked him down through there. This difference, I can see why it was made, but in the book, this never actually happens. They never actually see Gandalf until after the fact. In the Battle of Isengard, or Flotsam and Jetsam, whatever you want to call it, they see Gandalf after the fact, and at that point, they just kind of tell Gandalf what's going on, or what happened to them. So I can see why the changes were made. It was made to really show Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli interacting with Gandalf, and for them to know that he was alive and had this big surprise thing. So I see why it was made and why the changes were done. But yeah, it doesn't happen in the book. They don't see him till after. Number 2. Now, number 2 is really interesting. Although it's not probably as important as everything else, it's one of those minute little details that you find out about the book and the difference between the movie, it kind of makes you say, man, I wish they would have included that. So, what am I talking about? It's just a simple conversation. But at the end of the Two Towers film, Legolas and Gimli have a conversation about how many orcs that they killed. Legolas says, I ended up with 42. And then Gimli says, oh, Ritty, that's really good for a young princeling. I got 43. And he's like, what? And then sees the orc laying down, and he shoots the orc that Gimli's sitting on top of. And he says, oh, now I have 43. He goes, well, he was dead. And he's like, no, he was twitching. He said, no, he's not, because he's got my axe embedded in his skull. Nice little conversation that's funny, that kind of develops the character to keep going as far as like this little war that they've got going on, because they have animosity towards each other because of an elf and a dwarf, obviously. But in the book, they have a different conversation, and it's really cool. So in the book, they're talking about after they defeat Sauron. And once they defeat Sauron, Gimli says, oh, yeah, you should go to the glittering caves with me. I'll show you around. I'll show you all this great stuff. And Legolas agrees. Legolas says, okay, of course, I'll go with you if you go and walk Fangorn with me and walk around that forest. So it's a simple conversation, and it's a simple thing, which Peter Jackson actually filmed Gimli and Legolas walking around Fangorn Forest. And it was supposed to be included in The Return of the King, but they cut it out. So, therefore, that sucks that they didn't put that in there. But it's one of those small differences that I think is important to the story, because it builds the extra layer and it builds the extra history of that place. So it would have been nice to see that conversation and to see that actually take place in the third film. But what can you do? Maybe the 20-year anniversary will get something like that. All right, guys, it's time for number one. And number one is one of those rare instances where I actually agree with the movie over the book. Now, I am not saying that Professor Tolkien didn't have a clue of what he was talking about. I'm saying from a storytelling standpoint, it just makes sense of why it was changed. So what is number one? Well, let me tell you. Number one is the fact that Faramir captures Frodo, Sam, and of course Gollum. And as he's captured them, he investigates them, he interrogates them, and just to see what is going on, who these people are, why are they traveling out this way, and what are they doing out in the middle of Gondor, out just in the middle of Gondor? Why are two hobbits and this gangly creature, as he says, out in the middle of Gondor? Well, come to find out, he finds out it's the ring, that Frodo has the ring, and that this is their task, this is why they're out here. And so he proceeds to say, this is a chance for Faramir, Captain of Gondor, to show his quality. And what he means by that is he wants to take the ring to his father, Denethor, who we meet in The Return of the King. And he wants to get this glory for taking the ring. So as the story progresses, it's like this constant change of heart that Faramir has. And it's like he gets weaker until he gets to the point where he's like, you know what, Frodo, just go. I've seen what it's done to Gollum. Just go. I mean, he doesn't say that, but in more or less words, he probably ends up saying that. And he lets him go, and he ends up being delightful. Delightful, one of my favorite characters of the film and the book. But in the book, he has this conversation with Frodo. And he knows that Frodo has the ring. And his exact words in the book are, this happened to my brother. He got sidetracked by this. It affected him. So his exact words are, I would not touch this thing if it laid by the highway. You have just stripped the ring of all of its power in that sentence. as Philip Boyens has said in the past. And you have stripped that from the ring being so powerful that someone's like, oh, I've seen what it's done to them, but I wouldn't touch if it lay by the wayside. This ring is so evil that even Gandalf doesn't want to see it. Even Galadriel had a moment where she, almost gave in. So you take the character of Faramir, and it does expand upon the character of Faramir. I mean, there are, and I get where Tolkien was coming from, that there are some people that are genuine, just good people, and they're not bothered by it. Just like in real life, some people aren't affected by bad things. They don't want anything to do with it. I get it. Those people exist, yes. But to say in this instance where Sauron's basically Satan and the ultimate temptation is in front of him, to say, to have the same power to resist it as Tom Bombadil, I don't understand why it was written like that. But I trust Professor Tolkien, and ultimately I will always choose his work over what Peter Jackson did. Even though I love the Peter Jackson films, I still see why the change was made, why there was a difference in that, and where they needed to get to. So all these things that happened in the movie, Frodo going to Osgiliath, Frodo encountering a ring wraith there, and then going through this tunnel, all that never happened. Now, additionally, there's some other stuff that happens that I can't go into on this episode because it requires me to talk about it on the next episode. So, the next episode, we're going to talk about the Return of the King, and we're going to top 5 this time and go to 10. So we're going to do, instead of 5, we're going to do 10 for the Return of the King, because there are some huge differences that we want to talk about and we want to make sure get included. But guys, thank you so much for joining me today. That is your top 5 major differences of the Two Towers. Make sure you follow me right here on Instagram and Twitter, and then you subscribe to the channel right here for your next video and more videos like this. Hit that notification bell so you know when the next video goes up. God bless you, and remember, always keep your family first.